Alrighty, welcome back in. I hope you guys had a nice pause and break through Module 6 as an office hours just to take a break. So I was catching up on any of the assignments that you are running late on. We're excited to be able to get feedback from folks. So we're gonna go ahead and get started today. And we're really changing our tune now, moving towards the future. What does your career might look like in science policy and advocacy, looking into transitioning what those steps are, and really celebrating sort of the path moving forward now that you've known and started your fundamentals. So I want to start out actually with celebrating one of our very own SciPol trainees who was able to be accepted into the 51st cohort for the AAAS STPF Rapid Response cohort, in particular in the AI Rapid Response call this recently. So very excited for Rebecca. Congratulations. So if she can do it, we all get to celebrate in her path, but also I'm excited for everyone else, wherever you go, whatever you do in the future. An announcement from one of our co-coordinators, Angela. She wanted to just emphasize about the team-based organization initiative based out of Union of Concerned Scientists. They're actually reaching out to her to see if they'll continue the chapter at UCI, but she's planning on graduating soon. So if you're at UCI and you want to get involved in this type of practice and training, feel free to reach out to Angela. I'll drop in her contact information after I do announcements, as well as reach out to us. It's a great way to be able for you to build your own sort of programming, take on a team, and build advocacy action plan for climate change, as well as some funding and resources for you to be able to do that. All that information is readily available on their website. That's something that we're happy to support you in if that is where you want to start moving towards post this program. Just a heads up, we're looking at your elevator pitches. We're looking at your first draft of your written document. If you haven't already, submit those. Please submit them. We will be picking our finalists, our top 10 to 15 finalists for the elevator pitch competition on September 19th. But just a heads up, as you're sort of thinking and you're getting your feedback, please be prepared to submit your second draft, your final draft for your writing piece, which will also be considered for competition with results announced on the competition day on September 19th. So without further ado, then I get to introduce our moderator today, as well as student slash co-coordinator. So incredibly excited to have Amy be able to moderate for this panel. She is I think the best person to be able to moderate, sitting in a position that's similar to yours and getting to learn everything that we're looking forward to learn. So Amy Ralston is an aspiring science policy analyst at the University of California, Irvine. She's pursuing her PhDs in physics. Her research focuses on uncovering the mechanisms of star formations, quenching, and galaxy clusters. At UCI, she serves as the event Outreach and Communication Director of SPAN, the Science Policy and Advocacy Network at UCI, a national science policy network chapter. So she'll be able to introduce the chat today as well as our panel and why we're discussing this here. I'm going to pass it to Amy.
Wonderful. Thank you, Joanne. That was very kind. Okay, so let's set the stage for what this panel is about to get started. So what this panel today is going to be focused on is what a career in science policy actually looks like, how our panelists made that transition from where we are, bright-eyed students with unbridled passion, but not much know-how, to distinguished science policy professionals. So in sum, hopefully we'll be able to gain some insight from them on what the view is like from the top. So once we've already gotten there, what does the day-to-day look like? Secondly, you might have noticed from our scheduling that next week we're also going to have a panel for Module 8. That one's going to be more focused on fellowships and the transitionary period. This one will be more focused on the career stage. So speakers here today have already transitioned to their science policy positions and have worked in various sectors for many years. So in the next module, we're going to focus more on folks who have recently been awarded a science
Oh boy, here we go. All right, so picking up from Amy, then next week we'll be focusing on folks who are really who have either recently and or
Encourage you to
within
keep
their
track of
career.
thoughts.
Oh, do we have you back, Amy?
Oh, did I disappear?
Yeah, you kind of locked up.
Oh, okay. Let me turn my camera off. Where did you last hear me?
That next week's speakers and this week's speakers, next week will have recently done their fellowships.
Gotcha. Okay, so I want to move on to telling you all how the structure of today is going to work. So from now until the end of the hour, our panelists are going to first discuss questions that we've already prepared. And if there's any additional time, we'll be able to take questions from the audience. So I encourage you to keep track of your questions. If you want to submit them as you're going, please don't submit them to the chat as a whole. Send them directly to Joanne. That'll allow us to keep an ongoing Google Doc so we can better keep track of the questions. Let's see. And Jen, are there any more logistics that you'd like to go over before we jump in?
Did you want to add at the end that we'll be jumping into breakout rooms?
Yes, thank you. And after that first hour where we're all going to be together in this room, we are going to try something a little new. We're going to jump into breakout rooms where hopefully all of us will get some more one-on-one interaction with our wonderful speakers today. So if you also would like a chance to ask it directly, you can save it for that period of time as well. So that'll be the last 30 minutes of class today. All right. So to introduce today's panelists, I'll start with Sophia Casca, PhD. It's my pleasure to introduce her. She is an accomplished figure in the science policy arena of nonprofits and societal groups. So if you have questions about that, you should keep your questions for her. She has served as a member, a volunteer, staff member, and board member of nonprofit federations, bringing her experience in the biomedical sciences and program management to these different entities. So currently, she serves as the manager of science initiatives and outreach at Research America. Sophia has been instrumental in driving many programs like the Science CEO Initiative, which facilitates policy-related information exchange among science society CEOs, so getting them to actually talk to each other and set priorities. We love that. And the Civic Microgrant Program, which provides training to early career scientists. So you'll notice that as a trend between all of our panelists here today. We're all very lucky to have them because they're all very passionate about bringing their expertise to early career scientists. Next, we have Mike Holland. Mike Holland is an authority in the realms of university and federal science policy. So university and federal science policy, ask your questions, Mike. He's currently serving as the Vice Chancellor for Science Policy and Research Strategies at the University of Pittsburgh. Mike's expertise in scientific oversight shapes cross-disciplinary research initiatives. So he has his finger on the button of many different initiatives spanning the sciences, engineering, humanities, you name it. Mike has also worked on energy research policies as a senior advisor for the U.S. House of Representatives Science Committee, as a senior policy analyst at the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, or OSTP as it's sometimes referred to, and is now the chair of the AAAS Section X, which focuses on the societal impacts of science and engineering. So you're probably going to hear a bit more about Section X today. I had not heard of it before, but it's a very cool opportunity that exists. And next, we'll move on to Adriana Bankston. Adriana Bankston, of course, we have much familiarity with here, but she is a prominent figure in the realm of federal, university, and think tank-based science policy. So federal university think tank, go to Adriana. Adriana Bankston is a senior fellow in science policy at the Federation of American Scientists, a new role. Very excellent. Congratulations to Adriana. Her previous position as a principal legislative analyst at the University of California Office of Federal Government Relations involved advocating for the university on federal policies which would impact university research with Congress, the administration, and other federal entities. As a former chief executive officer and managing publisher of the Journal of Science Policy and Governance, so JSPG, the big one, Adriana has also led international efforts to empower early career scientists and engineers in shaping science policy debates, and with Mike serves as the membership engagement chair for Section X as well. And lastly, but not least, It is my absolute pleasure to introduce Chloe McPherson, a distinguished expert in the government path of science policy. So currently, Chloe works at the NSF, or National Science Foundation, as a science policy analyst on the government affairs team. In her prior role as a government relations associate at AAAS, she was a key player in a wide array of projects, from the Catalyzing Advocacy in Science and Engineering CASE workshop all the way to the Golden Goose Award. So in 2020, something key to know about Chloe is that she was awarded the prestigious AAAS, so the American Association for the Advancement of Science, / ASME, so the American Society of Mechanical Engineers, both of them together, awarded her this fellowship, which is the Congressional Science and Engineering Fellowship, in order for her to do work in the House of Representatives in the US with a focus on energy policy. So she's also been actively involved with the National Society of Black Engineers, and she's served in many national and regional leadership roles. So these are all very, very seasoned professionals. I'm very lucky to have them. So please join me in welcoming our illustrious panelists, whose significant roles in a wide range of science policy avenues that's very unique to the policy today. They're going to provide essential and unique insights. And trust me, they have a lot of wisdom to bestow. I spoke with them briefly before this meeting. They have plenty to say. Hold your questions, but keep them coming. All right, so I'm going to turn on my video. Let's see if it will tolerate that. And we'll get started. So we're going to first begin with each panelist themselves describing what they do and what questions they attack in their role at their various positions. So let's start with Sophia and then Mike, if you'd like to spend around 5 minutes talking about what your responsibilities are, what you like, what you don't like about your job, and just generally what your day-to-day looks like. Sophia, you want to begin?
Thanks, Amy, for the wonderful introduction, and thanks everyone for the opportunity to be here today. I'm one of the ones on the East Coast that was affected by a power outage, so I'm in a coffee shop right now. But anyway, so I'm Sophia. I work at Research America, which is a nonprofit advocacy alliance. We consist of members of scientific societies, patient advocacy groups, industry, and more, and we come together to support policies and advocate for funding that support medical and public health research. So as mentioned, I oversee 2 programs at Research America, the Science CEO group, which I absolutely love because it's a really great way to get to know the CEOs of all of these different scientific societies and their senior staff members in the policy and communications fields. And we meet on a weekly basis to discuss and exchange timely policy information, which sometimes can change week to week. Thankfully, since Congress is on recess right now, there hasn't been too much going on, which makes my job a little bit easier. But they'll be back in full force very soon. The other program that I oversee is the Civic Engagement Microgrant Program, where we provide funding, mentoring, and training to early career scientists like yourself to work in groups and come up with activities that really help scientists connect with their local communities. So if you're interested, I'll drop a link in the chat after I'm done speaking. I would say my day-to-day is just very different every day. No 2 days are no 2 days are ever the same. Sometimes I'm on a ton of Zoom meetings organizing a lot of different things. Other days I have some downtime where I can really focus and just make progress on my work. To get here, I'll just quickly say I did the traditional academic path where I went to graduate school, then did a postdoc, and then after my postdoc transitioned into this role at Research America. So I'm one of the people that didn't do a fellowship to get a policy and advocacy job. So that it's not the only way to get into the field. But I did do a lot of things in grad school and as a postdoc to bolster my resume to get to this point. And we can definitely chat more about that later. So thank you, and nice to meet everyone.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sophia.
Okay, so I'm Mike Holland, currently Vice Chancellor for Science Policy and Research Strategy at University of Pittsburgh. What that means is I work for the equivalent of a vice president, vice chancellor for research. His title is Senior Vice Chancellor for Research, and he reports to the chancellor. So I'm senior staff. I work with faculty on big proposal development. I run our campus-wide research development fund, and I run Big Proposal Boot Camp, teaches faculty how to do big proposals. I work with faculty on honorific awards. Yeah, probably 40% or more of my job is just random senior staff stuff. So something comes in and somebody's got to deal with it. Well, some of that flows to me, some of it flows to another colleague of mine. My career arc, and I'll try to whiz through things very, very fast because for many people in science policy positions, there is a lot of movement. I am not unusual in that fact. So I went from my postdoc to the White House Office of Management and Budget. So every part of the government has an OMB examiner, and what I did as an OMB examiner was understand literally everything humanly possible about my program, which was DOE's Office of Science. So that's the program that funds the civilian national labs like Argonne, Fermi, Brookhaven, Oak Ridge, as well as a very large academic program, university program, and major infrastructure investments overseas, like the Large Hadron Collider at CERN. I had the biggest piece of that. So the main part of that job was to figure out, well, what is the department's Office of Science, Department of Energy's Office of Science asking for, and are they ready to ask for it, and are they asking for the right amount of money? So they sort of, very routine budget analysis. I had that was a program that was uniformly spending money. It was not a federal credit program. Later on, I did deal with the Title 17 loan guarantee programs for the energy technology programs. The other piece that is an OMB examiner that you are reviewing anything that's any governmental action that is associated with that. Your program, whether it is regulation, I didn't have any, whether it was legislation, so reauthorization bills, you would be tracking that to make sure that Congress was accurately reflecting the administration's priorities. You would be reviewing testimony from political officials in the department who were going up to testify to Congress. You would be reviewing responses for the record. You would be understanding what all of the relevant constituencies for that program was. In the main, that was largely the national labs and the professional societies, representing the various academic fields that were funded by the Office of Science. I jumped to the Office of Science and Technology Policy, where as a policy analyst, there are sort of like topically very similar kinds of things. You're sort of following what the bill, what bills are going on. You're, analyzing things happening on the Hill, but a lot more effort towards interagency coordination. So we worked on things like with one of my colleagues, trying to coordinate the with respect to X-ray light sources and neutron sources, so really important for material science and structural biology, sort of what NIH needed, what DOE had and what its needs were, and NIST, which had a research reactor. We're trying to sort of coordinate those assets across the agencies that own them and across their user bases that had a different agency footprint, including DoD, others like that. And then you would kind of put together a strategic plan, and then, in doing that in coordination with OMB, so that then got driven into the budget request. When I went to the Hill, I was the chairman's designee on the Energy and Environment Subcommittee of the House Science Committee. And the reason that they hired me was because I had been the OMB examiner for the Office of Science, and the chairwoman of that subcommittee had Argonne National Lab in her district and Fermi in the neighboring district. And so she had a lot of constituents that worked at Fermi, and therefore that account was very important for her local politics. So in the first two jobs, well, the first job I was a civil servant. The second job I was on detail from Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. When I went to the Hill, I was a Republican staffer when Mr. Bollert was chairman and hired PhDs and didn't care what your political affiliation was. Change of control of Congress. Judy Biggert, whose interest I represented, objected to the formation of ARPA-E. The incoming Democratic chairman, that was his signature issue. They didn't think that they could trust me on the issue, so they let me go. I went back to OMB, was the OMB Office of Science examiner again. They funded ARPA-E. I became the first ARPA-E examiner, which caused a little agita in the incoming chairman and his chief of staff, because they worried they had just fired, well, they had just fired the guy who became the ARPA-E examiner. But back to being a career civil servant. Then I was chief of staff to one of the undersecretaries in the Department of Energy, where I was an Obama appointee. That's impossible to do anymore, be a political appointee on both sides of the aisle, which is a sad state of affairs, given how nonpartisan basic, fundamental research is, but such is life. And then as chief of staff for this particular undersecretary at the time, it was like sort of like a chief scientist for the whole department, dealing with nuclear weapons issues, basic science issues, and energy technology issues. We didn't really mess with the environmental cleanup part of the department. So we were kind of doing strategic planning for the energy technology programs in particular. Did the first quadrennial technology review. So there was that sort of science and technology assessment, strategic planning component. There was a lot of stuff that the boss, just because of his rank in the department, ended up on tons and tons and tons of committees, and various sort of paper was flowing through that required his review and sign off. So I did a lot of that. Some of it was like when foreign nationals from certain countries wanted access to user facilities at the DOE national labs, they had to go through counterintelligence review, and those packages then had to go up through the boss. So I had to review all of those. I ended up, again, the Title 17 loan guarantee program that had been reenacted and was functioning again at the beginning of the first term of Obama. So I was then sort of with other chiefs of staff for whose bosses had to sign off on this. We went and sort of did the first pass review on those packages before the formal presentations went to the bosses. Oh gosh.
Hey, Mike.
Yes, I did all sorts of crazy stuff. I can stop.
No, it's wonderful. No, I think most of what you were saying, I could already fit them into our future questions. So I'm like rearranging it in my head. Wonderful. I mean, as you can all see,
I went way over. Sorry about that.
No worries. Only a little bit. That was pretty good. Let's move on. Adriana, if you'd like to tell us a little bit about what your day-to-day is like, and then we'll get to Chloe.
Sure. So I'll tell you just a little bit about FAS because it's very new, this role, but FAS is a nonprofit policy research and advocacy organization. They were founded in 1945 to meet national security challenges, and through evidence-based, scientifically driven and nonpartisan policy analysis and research. And they really address large challenges of our time, so to speak. This specific role is we'll be focusing on policy entrepreneurship related to their Day One project. So I'll share the link. But the idea is to give people tools and networks and opportunities to make their memos into something actionable, essentially. And it's a broader than that, but that's part of the main community. And so it's a really interesting area to think about policy entrepreneurship and what that means and how to make these ideas come to life in an actionable way. Before this, so I have sort of two different hats over time, and I'll try to keep it brief. But one has been focusing on research, policy, and advocacy, similar to what Mike has done in terms of, I come from an academics environment. I was interested in essentially research on research and trying to advocate for institutions improving the environment especially for early career researchers, and how we can advocate for better salaries and mental health issues and a number of other things. So I spent a few years doing research on the academic space with a nonprofit called Future Research. We published some papers and use that to actually advocate for increased postdoc salaries. So this was 2016 or so. And then became interested in sort of the connection between federal policy and the academic world and how that impacted grad students and postdocs specifically. So moved to DC, did a fellowship with Society for Neuroscience, where I essentially went to Capitol Hill to advocate for research funding in neuroscience, but more broadly, worked on the Hill Day, really enjoyed that, and learned how to work with Hill staffers. And then transitioned to the University of California, where I was close to 4 years there with federal relations and similar role advocating for research funding on the Hill. Also worked with agencies and the administration. So really interesting role. Happy to talk more about that. And now I'm sort of in the phase of, and I talked about Sigma Xi before, working at the state level, but today we'll focus on the FAS. So it's really, I think I'm in a phase where trying to build tools for trainees to engage in policy and through this program too. But as opposed to me sort of going to the Hill and doing this, we're trying to empower students to take their research and make it actionable. So happy to talk more as we move forward.
Last but not least, okay, I'm glad to be here with you guys tonight. I am also affected by the power outages on the East Coast, like Sophia, so I am in my office right now. So I'm Chloe McPherson. I work at the National Science Foundation, NSF, which I imagine most of you are familiar with. It has the mission to promote the progress of science. And so we are a research funding agency, and we fund the majority of basic research across the federal government. Our entire premise and purpose is to fund basic research, and recently getting more into translational research with the new TIP director that recently came online last year. So I won't bother a lot about NSF forever, but so I work in the Office of Legislative and Public Affairs, commonly known as OLPA around here. I am a science policy analyst, and so our job is kind of twofold. We have two customers, so to speak, our customers on the Hill and folks in the agency. And so the main role that I serve and that my team serves is to be a resource to folks on Capitol Hill, mainly on the committees of jurisdiction for NSF, as well as any member's office who's interested in science and doing something that could affect NSF, and making sure they have the information and resources they need from us. And then on the other side, we work with folks in the building. So often the NSF director and other leadership, when they go up to the Hill and testify, we prepare them for those sorts of things as well. So my personal portfolio includes the engineering directorate. So there's 8 directorates in NSF. And then as well, I cover issues like quantum, PFAS, advanced manufacturing, and a few other things like that. Quickly on my journey, I have been at NSF for the past year and a half, roughly, as a civil servant. Before that, as Amy said in her introduction, I worked on the Hill as a AAAS ASME Congressional Fellow, working for a member from Pennsylvania, actually, from the other side of PA, Chrissy Houlihan, who's right outside of Philadelphia. And there I was a jack of all trades, which is what you are usually when you work in the House. So my portfolio was science and technology, energy and the environment, STEM education, space, and eventually foreign affairs. So it's kind of funny when you work on the Hill, you're kind of thrust into a range of things, whether you're actually an expert or not on those things, which you learn fast, what you know, what you don't know. And then before that, I worked at AAAS for about 4 years in its Office of Government Relations. So I was lucky. I kind of got into this policy space as well before doing a fellowship. But then when I was trying to figure out my next steps, I decided to do a fellowship to figure out what I wanted to do next. Yeah, my background is mechanical engineering. I didn't do a PhD. I stopped at the master's, and that's about me going back in time.
Wonderful. Thank you, Chloe. So since you mentioned the TIP directorate, so lovely, you just segue, I would love to start with the question, or not start, continue with the question, what are the most pressing challenges / exciting new areas that you see opening up in recent years and see on the horizon? So Chloe, if you could start us out talking about the federal level with the TIP directorate in particular, and then others can bounce off, that would be great, because I just learned about this.
Sure, I'll be quick. Yeah, so you might have heard of a piece of legislation called the CHIPS and Science Act that was signed into law just over a year ago, and that was a big push by the Hill to invest more money into NSF and into research and semiconductors and manufacturing and lots of things. And so that has potentially given a new emphasis, at least at NSF, on translational research, things that'll be changing folks' lives in the near term, as well as the long term, which is what basic research that we fund usually does. So TIP is, oh my gosh, Technology, Innovations, and Partnerships is the acronym for it. And so it has a focus on different key technology areas that are going to be pressing now into the future. I'd say AI is probably the big one that we're focused on right now. There's a big push on the Hill, as my fellow panelists I know as well, for artificial intelligence. And so that's a big area that we're focusing on now into the future.
Wonderful. Let's see, I would love to also talk about, so Sophia, you mentioned that there's going to be a lot of opportunity with the newness of open science initiatives that have come down from the White House. Would you care to talk about that?
Sure. So last year there was a memo, kind of I referred to as the Nelson memo. This was the Alondra Nelson was the acting director for OSTP when this dropped, kind of essentially making a call for federally funded science to be accessible to taxpayers. And so the different federal agencies were tasked to come up with their own policies that would abide by let's say the rules set forth by the Nelson memo. And so we've already seen some movement with, like, I believe at NASA and NIH on their proposed policy memos, and kind of moving forward, we'll see more and more from other federal agencies for how they're basically going to follow the rules that were set forth by the memo. So that's definitely something to keep an eye on, especially because this will affect how a lot of journals will work. Yeah, it costs money to publish. There's a lot on the back end paying people to actually do this, right? Like, you have to have a staff for publishing and things like that. So, yeah, what does that mean for the cost of publishing? Are costs going to have to go up? Can they stay the same? How can we make sure it's equitable? There are a lot of questions that I think remain to be answered. So that's definitely one of the hot topics to keep an eye out on.
Thank you. Mike, Adriana, would you like to add anything that you think of with respect to this question?
In terms of sort of big topics to pay attention to in the future,
Yeah,
certainly with now, like where just passed the year anniversary of the Inflation Reduction Act. But the Inflation Reduction Act, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Bill, and the CHIPS and Science Act are a just absolute sort of, foundational change in U.S. Science policy, in the sense that since the early 1980s, when Ronald Reagan was elected, the U.S. avoided industrial policy like the plague. It was almost a bad word, and everybody tried to not say it. And now that has changed, and that's very much driven by the fact that our position, we are still the largest economy in terms of absolute currency number, and purchasing parity we may not be, and then the R&D portfolio, we used to be absolutely dominated global R&D. That is no longer the case. We could be surpassed in terms of public and private in a few years, and that has just profoundly changed both parties' understanding of that issue. That means that neither party has sorted out what industrial policy means moving forward, how that's linked to research policy, to science policy, to technology policy. None of that is sorted, and the forcing functions that brought us to this point, I can't believe are going away. So I think that for all of you who are at your stage of your career, figuring out what that means in the areas that you're interested in, whether it's ag, basic physical sciences, the stuff that I've spent most of my career on, biology, whatever the case may be, that'll keep you busy for the next 30 years.
Yeah, I can add a little bit. So AI, of course, as was already mentioned, I think when I was at UC and even now, thinking through the landscape of research, I think with the tip, it's changing, and certainly there are a lot of discussions about basic versus applied research, how the landscape would change, and how that would affect the funding at NSF and other agencies too. And so that's been interesting. National security, Mike sort of alluded to this, but there's again a lot of discussions with US, China, and other things, and how to protect research knowledge as well. Open science. I think the OSTP just had a call recently about this, so obviously big discussion there. And then wanted to just mention two other things, themes that I think I've seen. One is regional innovation, again from NSF, right? And so this idea of innovating across the country in states that don't have resources, that may not have facilities for research, and trying to move away from the coast in a way, but be able to take advantage of talent that is across the country that's not always thought about. And that leads to, this larger question of what the STEM workforce looks like, which I don't think has been brought up. But again, that's another thing that we've looked at this from, the research perspective. Certainly when, again, most of my time at UC were in COVID times. And so there was a lot of discussions of, what will happen to graduate students who are entering science now and their futures in science. But I think also the workforce, and with the CHIPS Act, certainly there is this question of what will this look like in science, but also more broadly, and the workforce is changing too, which is fascinating. So.
Thank you. Lots to think about. So I'd like to transition to our next question, which I'm sure is the primary thing on most of our minds. So what are some of the most significant lessons that you've learned throughout your career? And if you could go back, is there something that you wish you could tell yourself that you would do differently, or would you do everything the same? You just nailed it the first time. Adriana, I'd love to start with you and then work my way to Mike. As a little primer, when we talked earlier, I would love to touch on networking in particular, because I know I personally am not very comfortable with it. So any advice you have with that too, would love.
Okay, no pressure. So first, yeah, what I've learned, I think, and I've said this on panels before, but one thing I've learned is that you really, even though, you know, you have your PhD in the sciences, when you start in policy, you're really starting from the bottom and learning a whole new field and language, you know, that took some getting used to, really realizing, okay, I'm starting from scratch. I have to learn from everyone else, and no one really cares that I have a PhD in biochemistry, which is true. Skills do translate, but the discipline didn't. So getting used to that, but also that was really exciting. Just being able to transition and learning how things work, and it's just a fascinating field. The other thing is, I think what I have been most surprised by is just the level of impact I would be able to make, because I'm still fairly early in my career, I would say. You know, transitioned fairly recently with a fellowship, and you know, while again the role at UC, just everything that I was able to do there, including you know, we wrote language for the CHIPS Act on postdocs. Actually, they didn't have postdocs in the bill, so they now do. And we wrote a section on funding for professional development for postdocs. That's just one of the things, and involving a lot of students in policy and advocacy, which is really exciting, and that's one of the things I like to do. So that's an encouragement maybe for you all, that if you feel like you're, you know, starting out and don't know what you're doing, your expertise is valuable, and also people will listen, and it's a really great environment to learn. You know, it's a very collaborative field, a lot of people, smart people to learn from. To the networking piece, I think you kind of get used to it. I sort of joke about this, but it's true. I think in a lot of people here, you know, scientists are not very sociable. We have to learn how to do this, and policy is a very people-oriented field. So you're always in meetings, you know, leading them, or in some sort of subset, or you have to speak on something. I don't think there's been a meeting where I didn't say something in the past 4 years. But I think I was somewhat lucky, because towards the end, especially this year, you know, my boss was sort of create those opportunities for me. You know, he would say, "Oh, I have another meeting. Can you lead this meeting in 2 hours?" So very like on the spot, but that's really how it is, right? And then you're like, okay, now I have to learn how to do this, and that's how you learn. You really learn on your feet. That's how it works. So just takes practice. So don't be discouraged. Most people are friendly, and just you know, be prepared before you go into meetings, but people want to hear from you.
So I think the thing that looking back, and of course, like I mean, I finished my postdoc in '98, so I'm like far more senior than everyone else here. The thing, absolutely, without question, and like I had undergraduate degrees in electrical engineering and chemistry. I was in my PhD is in analytical chemistry. I did a little side gig to try to get a master's degree in environmental policy. So I was like a very good professional student, avoiding real life for as long as humanly possible. Out of all of that, the single most valuable class I ever took, and what differentiates me from many of my peers and lots of faculty that I work with, was the technical writing course that I took. My job is, in the main, distilling a lot of stuff down to very concentrated bits. So the ability to simplify, but capture the essential piece and write in plain language. Quite frankly, I will tell you that's probably the only reason I have a job, and I've had all the jobs that I've had. I can do that really fast, and it's not that I'm brilliant by any stretch of the imagination. And that technical writing course was absolute unmitigated torture from start to finish. Best thing I ever did, and it really is probably one of my differentiating skills. The other thing just sort of, a technical toolkit. I was an analytical chemist, and though, analytical chemists it's kind of like, there are these big families of techniques, and you kind of like march through them, and it's like one damn technique after another and all the variations. So I kind of oddly and unexpectedly got good at kind of not exactly technology assessment, but I can sort of look at something like a high energy physics accelerator complex and kind of like start to get a feel for what it is and how to think about it. That's like been a core part of what I've ultimately done, particularly when I was an OMB examiner. The other thing, and I don't, this was, I think, I was just sort of frustrated with being a bench scientist, and at the end of grad school, wanted to start picking, getting involved in stuff that it was like more my interest. So I got involved in graduate student government, and ended up both on a committee. So I learned how to do committee work when I was in graduate school. Everything in government and in a lot of universities works on committees. So learning how to do committee work and function in a committee, core skill. And then the other thing, and this was in graduate school, ended up on the finance committee just because we were doing battle over student fees with the undergrads. And that understanding how one group of people spending another group of people's money works. When I got to OMB, literally, like the federal budget was the same thing, lots of more bells and whistles and complications, but and you add 5 zeros kind of thing, and you're in the realm of federal budgets. But like that sort of not partisan politics, but the group dynamics of here's a scarce resource and we have to figure out how to allocate things, very important. And again, a lot of the skills that I learned fighting over $500 or $5,000 was nearly identical when it was 500 million, bizarrely so. And then I also got very good at understanding what I like to do relative to what other people like to do. And I'm perfectly happy to hand things off to other people and know it's like good to know what other people do well, and conversely, what you do not do well. So that sort of perpetual student mode is where I'm best. I am capable of managing people. I am not as good at it as some of my colleagues. And so when there are things where that's more important, I'm totally happy to like hand that off. I'm happy to help. I'm happy to be told, I do take direction well. I don't have to be in charge all the time. So like sort of knowing what you like and being really candid with yourself about what you do well and what you do not do well, and then positioning yourself so that you are emphasizing the good parts and being adept at handing off and empowering other people who have complementary skills. In these, because a lot of science policy shops are very, very small. So it's a few number of people covering like a huge waterfront, and you have to move fast. And you particularly in my jobs where I was working close to the political levels or as a political, there are like screw ups have consequences. And so there's like being able to work fast and just not get over enamored of your own thoughts and kind of test ideas and like and iterate really fast is, I think, super important.
Mm-hmm. Could I try and paraphrase what you just said, just to make sure I understand what you're saying? Like, it sounds to me like what helped you succeed was leveraging the skills that you got from your PhD rather than the particular concrete knowledge that you
yeah. It literally was like, because I was dropped in I started in July and at OMB in September, the first week of September, the Office of Science was coming in with their budget request, and I didn't know anything about them, right? And it was literally, how do you learn as fast as, and there wasn't any training, so it's like, kind of rattling around inside your head and thinking, well, what do I know how to do? What skills do I have? And how do you redeploy them? And it's just, you'll find out a lot of stuff is more transferable than you think. It's just try to like, how do you frame an issue and then run with what you got?
Awesome. Thank you for that perspective. Chloe, did you find that when you were trying to break into things, did you feel out of your depth at the beginning as well, or was it a more smooth transition with the fellowship?
So when I worked at AAAS, that was when I just finished grad school and I'd done an internship at the White House and then was trying to figure out my place in this world. So that was 2017, I believe. And it was, I didn't have, these programs didn't really exist when I was in graduate school, at least not to the extent that they do now with so many, SPN and JSPG and all of these great organizations doing this sort of work. So I really didn't know what I was doing. I kind of just fell into it, knowing that I wanted to do something that wasn't working. So I'm an engineer working at a company because that's what we were trained to do. They prepared us to go out and work at a company, and I realized pretty early on that's not what I wanted to do. So I was out of my depth at first, but I feel like there's a few skills that kind of help. I think everything that Mike just said, and I think something particular that I've learned and seen other people learn the hard way is just to be nice to people around you, just to be kind, because policy is a very small world. You don't know where someone might be tomorrow. I think there's like a joke when I worked in the Hill, like you don't know who will be your boss tomorrow, because it's a very, like Mike and Adriana and Sophie have said, people move around quite often and you never know where someone's going to be tomorrow. I think the other thing that has been interesting to see people learn the hard way, going along with being a nice person, is just because you have an advanced degree, particularly in the science field, when you walk into the policy space, that doesn't mean you're going to automatically fix everything. You still have a lot to learn about how the process works and the system works, and slotting in your expertise and what you know to that, as opposed to thinking, oh, well, I'm going to, like, I know science, I'm going to come in and fix this entire system that, has been broken, but I'm going to fix it. So that's been interesting, particularly as folks who do the fellowship come in very often with their PhD and, think that they're experts in things and decide, oh, I can do all of the things. And then quickly to answer your question on networking is challenging. And I think, but it's such a big part of this policy world. I think one way to kind of think of it as less scary is don't think of it as networking, just think of it as having conversations with people. I think another piece of advice is to have coffees, like informal coffees with people, to learn about their paths to how they got to where they are. And when in doubt, ask people about themselves, because people usually like to talk about themselves. So that's always one way to have a conversation without, it feeling hopefully too awkward.
Wonderful, thank you. Mike, did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, because I didn't address the networking again, and I think Chloe's comment that don't think of it as networking is like absolutely true. I mean, I stumbled into my job at OMB like in the most insane way because I wanted to be a AAAS fellow, and I hadn't applied for anything in a long time, so I was like practicing, and I just found 3 jobs and I applied, and I kind of got called in for it, which was. And it was I applied for 2 jobs at OMB, and I had to ask them which job they were calling me in for. And I literally knew nothing about OMB. And so it's like a combination of like, kind of I don't want to say not making your own opportunity, but like maybe stretching yourself a little beyond what your comfort zone is. It's not doing insane things, but like really kind of like push beyond exactly what you know. And then the other piece is let people know what you want to do. And because it's a small world in science policy and lots of, again, very, bizarro connections, because it's a small world and we all move around a lot. One of the guys at NSF, who's like spectacular, JD Kundu, he was at OMB and then he went to NSF, but he was my intern on the House Science Committee. And the reason he ended up as my intern, because I got a call from the committee office saying, your intern's here. And I was like, I didn't know I had an intern. it's because he was at a party. He was a postdoc at Maryland. He was at a party with his housemate, was basically saying, and I want to get the hell out of the lab and I want to do, but I don't know what I want to do, but I want to do it. And it turns out one of my colleagues on the House Science Committee, who was a lawyer type in environmental law, she was like, oh, well, I work on the science committee. Give me your resume. And like, literally, that's how he ended up there. So it's one of those things. It's like, let people know what you want to do, and you will find out people want to help you. And I can give you umpteen versions of that. And so it's that combination of reach a little further than what your comfort zone is and let people know what you want.
And one very quick follow-up, which this story is hilarious because JD is now the Deputy Assistant Director for the Computer Information Science and Engineering Directorate at NSF, which is a very high up role. So, you know, you never know where people are going to be 5-10 years from now, and those relationships last.
Wonderful. Thank you. Sophia, I remember you saying something similar about networking, especially with your peers. Could you touch on that a little bit more?
Sure. So I think this applies especially when you go to, well, one, networking at your own university, within your own departments and other departments. Go to those social events, go to the departmental picnic, go to the holiday party, because the people in your class, the people in the class above you, the people that are going to go below, that are below you, like someone on here mentioned, everyone's going to scatter, everyone's going to go into different places. You never know when one of your friends from grad school or one of your fellow postdoc peers might actually end up being a job connection for you. Same thing for conferences. Don't just retreat to your hotel room at 5 o'clock when posters are done. Go be social. You know, awesome connections for you job-wise, but will end up being friends long-term. That's how I built a network of friends in DC before I even moved here, is because I became friends with a lot of people through conferences. So moving to DC wasn't as scary. And now they work in different places like NIH and at different nonprofits and things like that in the policy world and elsewhere. So it's really cool. So don't discount getting to know people in your department and at conferences.
Awesome. Thank you all. So I think that is a perfect place to stop with our broader conversation. Now I'm thinking we can split up into breakout rooms so that those of you who want a bit more face time with our different speakers can get that. Joanne, do you know how we should do that in terms of creating the breakout rooms? Oh, I think you're muted.
Yeah, I'm creating them right now, and you should be good
Awesome.
to go. And you should be able to enter your own. So I'm going to go ahead and open all rooms. And our speakers should have their own rooms to join.